Welcome to the 17th episode of Speaking of Poetry. I am Rennie McQuilkin, publisher of Antrim House Books, whose authors are featured in this series. I am delighted to be joined today by Patricia Horn O'Brien, whose first book, When Less Than Perfect Is Enough, was published by Antrim House in 2012. About the book, Connecticut Poet Laureate Dick Allen says, "In this beautifully crafted work of returning, of driving home, of attempts to keep loved ones safe, Pat O'Brien's poems hold on through troubled times of smoke and rain and a devastating car crash. Simultaneously, they reach out to others, always returning to the solaces of contemplation and love." Pat O'Brien is a woman for all seasons. In addition to being an award-winning poet whose work has been widely published in literary journals, she has been a social worker helping the underserved and those in medical crisis or affected by adoption. She has also helped establish hospice services in 3 Connecticut prisons, including the York Correctional Institute for Women. Pat is a member of the Guilford Poets Guild, helped found Connecticut River Poets, and is richly involved in the world of Shambhala Buddhism. She lives in Old Saybrook. Welcome to Speaking of Poetry, Pat O'Brien.
Thank you, Rennie. Thanks for inviting me to be included in this wonderful series, Speaking of Poetry. I got to watch some of the videos of the former poets. They're really wonderful, so I feel very honored to be part of this endeavor. This is a poem by McQuilkin, who was a Japanese poet in the 18th and 19th century, who wrote this, and I found it in my little Zen calendar. And it's just recently I realized how much it's affected my thinking and also helped me find some answers about why I write poetry. This is called Life, and he says, "People born into this floating world quickly become like roadside dust. At dawn, little children, by sunset, white-haired and old with no inner understanding. They struggle without cease. I ask the children of this universe, why do you bother to pass this way?" So I realize I agree with his premise, and I'm also struggling against it and trying to find answers. And I think having poetry as part of the drive I have has been a tremendous help in squaring my life off with this very hard question. The poems that I'm going to read today are kind of roughly divided up into sections, and the first one is from my family of origin, and it occurs to me that although the life's lessons that one receives as a young child are often hard, by taking a good look at them, it also helps to establish a way to live in this life, in this very hard life. So the first poem I'd like to read is One Way to Remember It. It's in 3 sections, and each one is a different point of view, although they're always in the poet's voice. 1. Our mother gathers us into her church of outlandish faith. We'll wait for Daddy, and we wait, holding dinner, holding our breaths until the moment life starts up again on our exhaled and unnamed fear. Like most nights, he finally appears transformed from the all-out man who had left us that very morning to the one now standing in the doorway, so precipitous, so drained. The menu for the night in white chalk on the kitchen blackboard had tricked those of us who fell under its spell. Dinner for 4, mother, father, son, daughter, the clamor of silverware and chatter. Now the meal's particulars catch in our throat like words or tears. 2. The grinding ride from the lobby to the 7th floor is endless, but hardly long enough for smoothing his hair, examining his nails, preparing the story of how the guys in the office stood, a solid wall of protest against his having to catch the bus, having to hit the buzzer. He sees himself framed in the doorway, the good father, as if his hands would not tremble for a shot, just a shot of any remedy, maybe just one more than one. And as the elevator clangs its way to the solemn gathering at the dining room table, he jingles his pocket change, conjuring the story that explains how he's been missing and what he has to offer in his place. I have a poem that I've written for my 3 sons, all of whom are swimmers. And as I was putting together the work for today, I realized how much the water and the ocean seems to be a thread throughout my poetry. This is called Where the Ocean Begins. And although it has a very small image of a shell, the larger picture, I think, has this very grand notion of ontogeny recapitulating phylogeny, and I love that idea. I also love the idea that these children are our children, but they're also everybody's children. That has rather large scope. Where the Ocean Begins for my sons. You swim at night, scooping stars from the water's steeliness, or by day, fracturing sunlight, oblivious to the heat it gives you anyway. And yet, when I ask if you can hear the ocean's ebb and flow in shells' corridors, you admonish me for such foolishness. Don't I know we only conjure up the shell's once roiling bed? Maybe so, but I do know that ocean is everywhere, starting when you were the fish and I the safe haven, dense and brackish. The sea undulates, teaching us the rhythm. Your children, some unyet born, dance along the beach's edge, each at once seagull, amphibian, fish, briny depths, and the depth waves, hard-earned and then gone. But the children return, perhaps not the same children, but then see how the ocean begins again. I've one other poem about my sons. This one is for Sean. When Sean was born, my mother said his eyebrows are like angels' wings, and that image has stuck with me for a long time. And this poem is not written that long ago, but those angel wings image has stuck with me. It's called Around We Go. I think of the times I wanted to grind your foot beneath a polite, quiet table. Or when I could haul you around, how often I'd have to leave the room, your fussing more than a mother could forestall with kisses or a breast's sweet offering. Such a sour start for a boy whose eyebrows arched like angels' wings. My motherliness, poor match for nights sleepless from cries no rightful angel would let loose. So just when did you earn those angel wings? Well, maybe not, but close enough to fly this house and settle in a house with 2 prickly angels of your own. Enough to maintain without a thought that you'd want to die before life flies from either of your winged girls. So, another section, love and marriage. And this, I picked 3 poems that sort of trace the history of our relationship, or at least some parts of it. The first one is called Trips, and it takes place, the setting is our early marriage when my husband spent a lot of time on the road, and he also wanted us to be safe. So this was a poem I wrote one of those trips that he went on the road. Trips. When you go away on business or some other pressing matter, like your mother's insistence, I plan to take the locks off all the windows you shut each night to keep us safe from sorrow and the loss of our silver. The moment I calculate the wheels of your craft are tucked up useless spheres, I will run from lock to lock, slamming their half moons out, forcing each window its height. I have dreamed of being blown across the room, of suffering the vapors. At night I will be tickled by the fear of thieves. I gauge that when your wheels hit ground again, I will have been stolen, your children gobbled up. And then the years pass and everything mellows, including me. And this is a poem I wrote in the last year or so after a walk, an afternoon walk with my husband John. It's called At Summer's End. Their conversation is of everyday stuff, wondering when they should stop mowing the lawn, wondering how long to allow for their trip south, wondering when to close up the house, and wondering if their 3 sons in 3 places are roaming under the same sun that's dazzling this bay, and wondering if they're not overcome by its brazenness. Or does that wondering actually come later on, as the sun's shadows steal the day? Oh, of course, it isn't the sun's shadows, but all the objects in its way. Still leafed weeping willow, the billowy field of marsh grass, their own car making its way home. He drives, and she lets sun and shadow cross her drowsiness. She thinks of how he had stopped ahead of her at the overlook, and how long it seemed before he turned back. And the last of these poems is called Dedication, and it was originally going to be part of the dedication for my book, but we figured out, Rennie and I figured out, that it also is a tribute to John's dedication. And so here it is. Dedication for John. Now and then I look up and find you across the room, reading, maybe, or on the phone. And although never seeming to be lost in a dream, you appear to me not unlike a dream. Your hazel eyes and Irish blush, suddenly here, as if I'd failed to see you all along. Your funniness, your willingness to listen, to read a poem of mine out loud so it arrives unexpectedly. A poem as fresh as one drifting from a meadow or over an ocean. The next section, a very large one, encompasses the world. The first poem I'd like to read was one that I wrote when we were in Iraq, and the newscaster was describing the conditions in Baghdad, where everything was turned to rubble, where people could not go out into the streets because it was so dangerous. The children couldn't go to school, and life was collapsed into the household. And I thought of the demands on a mother for keeping that household safe and keeping her family alive and well. A measure of safety. I know the map of this kitchen, how many paces from its south wall to its north, how many east to west. I know the measure of its sugar and salt. The measure of oil I gauge by its weight. I know from its window the point our street vanishes into the rubble of our neighborhood, a street that once had no vanishing point. I know the breathing of our children asleep in the next room, their whimpering sleep. Awake, my children imagine I know how to keep them safe. In dreams, danger seeps through every measured wall. I am a breast cancer survivor and have been involved in support groups for breast cancer survivors for many, many years now. And the current group that I belong to and have been facilitating over several years is called Circle of Strength. And indeed, it's exactly what we get from our group. And this was written at a time when we had a member named Amy who was very sick. And it was also the time that Sex and the City had just been released into the movie theaters. So this is a poem about Amy and that movie and our group. Another story for Amy. We're four abreast in the darkened theater. I didn't want to go to this girly movie, but I reserve my discerning scorn for another time. Away from these friends of mine, all from our support group for, excuse the expression, cancer survivors. Truth is, some of us are surviving better than the rest. One in our little band, Amy, is swathed in too many clothes for this June day, her head topped with a woolly knit cap. If we want to forget what's up, her scarf and cap refuse to let us off their dreadful hook. Signs that treatments, even as they're given, might only make you sick. For 2 hours plus, we sit as one, watching 4 40-somethings fling themselves at life like life is theirs, notwithstanding insubstantial men and occasional flops. Not so unlike us, at least the flinging part. To credits and an upbeat score, we file out into the post-matinee light, holding on to what we've got. A few good friends, a few good laughs, and a day that started out rainy, that's brightened up. Not sunny exactly, but something close to what we want. And speaking of the larger world, sometimes that larger world comes to you just in an adjoining shower, just in a dressing room. And this was a conversation I overheard in a locker room called Listening In. In the locker room, a mother and small-voiced daughter enter adjoining showers. I hear their voices rise above their twin cascades. Hear the ping on the metal divider between their matching work to remove this morning's salt and all of the beach that clings. The daughter calls out to her mother to let her know she was able to reach the soap, to let her know how the water helps her rinse off all the soap. All by herself, she inquires if her mother likes her shower too, and her mother laughs an answer which flows above, below the divider to reach the child's upturned face, her soapy feet. I have had only sons and never minded until this steamy room. Not a longing, really, but a blossoming. A mother and daughter happened to include me in. I have a few poems that I've written since my book was published. One was inspired by Greg Coleman, who's a friend of mine and a Tai Chi teacher, and I was complaining to him that my back was aching, and he had the suggestion of taking an imaginary string and holding it up and stretching the string to help my back. And that encounter with him inspired this poem. A lesson in alternative medicine for Greg. Imagine, he says, holding his right hand just above his forehead, his left hand level with the crook of his elbow, a string, or better yet, a ribbon. And I think enough pink grosgrain to secure a small, perfect gift. And he says, imagine your spine as you tug your right hand up a notch, again, and then again, until you've reclaimed your unbowed back. And I think of my pain as a present waiting to be freed from its wrap. A crow, or a rabbit, or an unsprung bud, lifting its head to the surprise of the sun, whether to fly, to hop, or to blossom. I have one last poem. I hope I have time. This is part of an endeavor I have with my friend Judy Perry, who has a couple of years ago had a near fatal automobile accident. And we are tracing in our program that we do together, along with Judy, me as the poet, and we have a musician, Jerry Silbert, and we have been presenting Judy's paintings, my poetry, and his music. So this is the first effort that she made after her accident, when she barely knew how to use a brush, and her painter friend said, tear up some of your old paintings and put them together. And this is the result of that effort, and this is my poem. So here's the scatter and the gap at once. The scatter that wakes you from the trance that made you think you had it right, that you were in charge, that life is as certain as the toast you are going to make when you get out of bed, as certain as your plan to call your friend, certain as the front door, the key in your hand. Then comes the cracking up, the break apart that tears you from your certain breakfast, that takes your friend, that blasts your door off its hinges and leaves you with the useless key you fling across the grass. Maybe it's then it begins. You let yourself collapse before the altar of this mess. You take a breath. You say, of course, you say, oh yes. And in a day or week or a slew of weeks, you stand up in the gap that comes when you abandon all you thought you knew and open to whatever happens next.
Pat, thank you for taking us on that wonderful trip, beginning in the dark days when your father rather let down the family, and through the days of motherhood when you glory in the angel's wings of your son and at the way he has come into his manhood, and through times when, even though things were not perfect, less than perfect was enough, and ending with those wonderful images of standing straight, of blossoming, of coming into your own, like your son, and ending with that wonderful statement. And in a day or a week or a slew of weeks, you stand up in the gap that comes when you abandon all you thought you knew and open to whatever comes next. That's just grand. Thank you so much. And also thanks to Ken Picard and Karen Handeville, who make this program possible. And if you would like to learn more about Pat O'Brien and read samples of her work, please visit the Antrim House website, antrimhousebooks.com. You may also be interested in other Antrim House poets whose lives and works are described on the website. Goodbye until we meet again next month for the next installment of Speaking of Poetry.